sit with me for a while. You asked about power, what it truly is, why men pursue it so relentlessly, and why so many are quietly undone by it once they find it. That's not a casual question. It's one that reaches into the oldest parts of the masculine psyche. Every man, whether he admits it or not, carries within him an instinct for power, the desire to stand firmly in the world, to influence, to protect, to create something that lasts. Yet the more a man chases power without understanding himself, the more that power begins to consume him. Jung saw this over and over again in his patients and in his own life, the moment when ambition becomes possession. Carl Jung wrote, "Where love reigns, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." He didn't mean that power itself was corrupt or shameful. He meant that when power is divorced from love, when it is not tempered by consciousness, empathy, and restraint, it becomes demonic in the literal psychological sense. It takes possession of the ego. Jung never condemned power. He simply warned that it must be integrated, not idolized. So let us speak clearly and quietly about it. I will lay out 7 hidden lessons Jung taught about power, lessons that were not meant for politicians or generals, but for every man who wants to govern his own life with steadiness and integrity. We'll move through what power is and what it isn't, how it appears in daily life, where it begins in boyhood, how it mutates when it's repressed, and finally, what it becomes when it matures into what Jung called the king energy, the axis of an integrated masculine psyche. 1. Power is not domination, it's integration. The first lesson is that power has nothing to do with domination. Domination is what insecure men do when they mistake control for strength. True power is not a performance of superiority. It is the ability to bring every part of oneself into alignment so that action flows from coherence rather than compensation. When Jung spoke of integration, he meant the process of reconciling what is conscious with what is unconscious, the light with the shadow, the acceptable with the repressed. Real power emerges from that reconciliation. It is the quiet authority that comes from no longer being divided against oneself. Think of a man who enters a room and does not need to prove anything. His words carry weight not because they are loud, but because they are undivided. He does not need to defend his ego or assert dominance. His presence itself communicates congruence. We often say that power corrupts, but Jung would argue that power does not corrupt. It reveals. It amplifies what is already inside a man. If he has not confronted his shadow, power will become the tool of that shadow. His insecurity will dress itself as arrogance. His fear will masquerade as control. But if he has integrated his shadow, if he has faced the chaos within, his power will express itself as stability and order. In that sense, power is simply the outer reflection of inner integration. 2. The hunger for power is the search for wholeness. Every destructive pursuit of power begins as an attempt to heal something that feels broken. When a man grows up powerless, ignored, mocked, overruled, his psyche makes an unconscious vow: I will never be small again. That vow becomes the engine behind his drive for achievement, status, or control. It propels him outward into the world, and often it works. He becomes competent, successful, respected. Yet beneath the success, the old wound remains unhealed. And so he keeps striving as if the next victory might finally make him whole. That is the paradox of the ambitious man. He is not driven by purpose, but by compensation. He doesn't build because he loves the work. He builds because he fears insignificance. Jung saw this dynamic clearly. The inflated ego, he said, is always shadowed by an equal inferiority complex. The man who seems most confident is often the one most terrified of falling back into the helplessness of childhood. This is the second hidden lesson. The hunger for power is not evil. It is simply misplaced longing for wholeness. Power becomes dangerous only when it replaces the inner work of integration with the outer illusion of control. A man who has not faced his wounds will use the world as his mirror, demanding validation from others for what he has not yet given himself. But a man who has faced his inner fragmentation no longer needs to prove anything. His pursuit of power transforms into a pursuit of order, contribution, and service. Real power does not fill a void, it closes a circle. 3. The boy who equated strength with losing love. Every man's relationship with power begins in the family. Our earliest experiences of authority and vulnerability shape how we later carry strength. If the father was harsh or unpredictable, the child learns that power is dangerous. If the father was absent, power becomes a fantasy, something longed for but undefined. If the mother rewarded compliance and punished defiance, the boy learns that love is conditional on submission. He grows up believing that to be strong is to be unlovable, and to be loved is to be weak. That belief splits his psyche in two. As an adult, he either suppresses his strength to preserve harmony, or he overcompensates by wielding it destructively. Jung saw this pattern again and again in men who oscillated between tyranny and passivity, between the fear of being too much and the fear of being nothing at all. But here lies the third lesson. Love and power are not opposites. They are two aspects of the same mature energy. It only feels impossible to hold both because the inner child still believes he will be punished for doing so. To heal that split, a man must remind himself, without affirmations, without theatrics, that love is not withdrawn when he stands firm, that his boundaries do not make him cruel, and that his authority can coexist with compassion. Until the inner boy trusts that, the man will continue to disguise fear as humility and control as leadership. But once he integrates the two, his power becomes trustworthy. He no longer needs to dominate or to disappear. He can stand his ground without losing warmth, and that is the rarest form of strength. 4. Power without awareness becomes possession. Jung warned that whatever we repress eventually takes on a life of its own. Power, when disowned, becomes a shadow figure that controls us from beneath consciousness. A man may appear calm, moral, and reasonable, but if he has banished his assertiveness, his aggression, or his sexual energy to the unconscious, those forces will find a way to express themselves indirectly. He will sabotage himself, lash out unexpectedly, or enact the very behaviors he condemns in others. This is why Jung described possession not as a mystical curse, but as a psychological reality. The man possessed by power is not its master, he is its servant. The more he insists on his control, the less of it he truly has. Unintegrated power leaks out through manipulation, coercion, or obsession. Awareness, therefore, is not a matter of analysis, but of relationship. To be aware of your power is to stand in honest contact with it, to say, yes, this capacity for dominance, anger, and drive exists in me, and I can bear to look at it. When you acknowledge that, you regain agency. What is seen can be guided. What remains unseen will always use you. This is why Jung said that consciousness is the key to freedom. Power that is unconscious is chaotic and compulsive. Power that is conscious is disciplined and deliberate. One rules through fear, the other governs through presence. 5. Containment, the quiet mark of maturity. Containment is one of Jung's most underestimated ideas. To contain is not to repress. It is to hold tension without collapse. A man who cannot contain his emotional energy, his anger, grief, or desire, will always generate chaos around him. He confuses expression with authenticity, release with relief, and ends up exhausting himself and everyone nearby. A mature man, by contrast, does not need to display his emotion to prove its depth. He can feel fully without spilling over. That steadiness is magnetic because it signals self-mastery. Jung understood this as the moment when a man begins to embody the archetype of the king, not a literal ruler, but the psychological center that orders the inner and outer worlds. Containment is what allows a man to hold power without being consumed by it. It is the vessel that transforms raw energy into constructive force. When a man has developed containment, people sense it. His silence does not feel passive, it feels solid. His decisions are not reactive, they are considered. That kind of composure cannot be faked, because it comes from having already confronted one's extremes and survived them. In a world addicted to expression, containment is revolutionary. It does not shout, it does not posture, and yet it commands respect. 6. The shadow side of avoiding power. Not every man abuses power. Some reject it entirely. They tell themselves they are above competition, that they prefer peace to control, that they have transcended the struggle for dominance. But often, this is not peace. It is avoidance disguised as virtue. Jung would call it the shadow of humility. When a man refuses his natural instinct for power, he does not become enlightened, he becomes invisible. His passivity breeds resentment in his relationships, stagnation in his work, and confusion in his sense of self. He wonders why he feels restless and overlooked, yet he refuses to step forward because he equates assertion with arrogance. Avoiding power does not make you harmless, it makes you ungrounded. The energy you suppress will eventually return through resentment, sarcasm, or passive aggression. The man who says, "I don't care about power," often ends up trying to control others indirectly through guilt or moral superiority. The 6th lesson is therefore simple but uncomfortable. You cannot escape power. You either integrate it consciously or it expresses itself unconsciously. Mature masculinity does not mean rejecting strength. It means owning it responsibly. Power is not about having your way. It is about carrying weight. It's the capacity to take responsibility without resentment, to act decisively without cruelty, and to remain calm under pressure. When you learn to hold that kind of power, you stop apologizing for existing. You stop diluting yourself for comfort. You stop asking for permission to lead. You simply begin to inhabit the authority that was always yours. 7. The archetype of the king, order and blessing. Jung believed that every man carries within him 4 primary archetypal energies: the warrior, the magician, the lover, and the king. Each serves a different function, but the king is the axis around which the others revolve. He represents order, stability, and generative leadership, the ability to bless rather than dominate. The immature king demands loyalty. The mature king inspires it. The immature king hoards power. The mature king channels it. The immature king seeks admiration. The mature king seeks service. To embody the king archetype is not to rule others, but to rule oneself. It is to bring order to one's own inner kingdom, to know what will be tolerated and what will not, what aligns with your values and what desecrates them. The king does not avoid conflict, he mediates it. He does not suppress emotion, he contains it. He does not perform authority, his life is the authority. When a man steps into this integrated form of power, his presence alone begins to organize the space around him. He doesn't impose order, he emanates it. Others feel steadier simply because he is steady. That is the essence of archetypal power. It radiates without aggression, influences without force. The seventh hidden lesson is that real power blesses. It gives structure to chaos without crushing it. It creates clarity without rigidity. It balances firmness with warmth. It transforms the instinct to control into the capacity to guide. That is what Jung meant when he said that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is the birth of the inner king. 8. Responsibility and witness. Eventually, every man who begins to understand power comes to the same realization. No one is coming to save him, and that is the beginning of freedom. Responsibility is not punishment, it is liberation. When you take responsibility for your emotions, your choices, and your direction, you stop being a victim of circumstance. You stop blaming the world for the limits of your own awareness. Jung emphasized the importance of solitude in a man's development. Not isolation, but reflective solitude. Power matures in quiet moments when you sit with your motives and your contradictions without immediately acting them out. But solitude is not enough. Every man also needs witness, other men who can see him clearly without judgment or competition. Brotherhood is not therapy. It is resonance. It is the experience of being seen by those who know what weight feels like. This combination, solitude and witness, is what keeps power honest. Alone you integrate. Together you remain accountable. And the refrain, as always, is not perfection but reliability. To be powerful is not to be flawless. It is to be consistent, steady, and responsible. Power, Jung taught, is never something you acquire. It is something that reveals itself as you become whole. It emerges naturally the moment you stop performing strength and begin to embody it. The man who fears power will always misuse it. The man who befriends it will serve through it. Weak men seek control to escape fear. Strong men face fear until control is no longer necessary. One acts from hunger, the other from alignment. If you find yourself obsessed with power, pause and ask, which part of me feels powerless? That is where your real work begins. Once that part is seen, the compulsion to dominate dissolves, and what remains is presence, the quiet, unshakable authority of a man who knows himself. Power, at its highest form, is not the ability to bend others to your will. It is the capacity to remain inwardly unmoved while everything around you shifts. It is the calm backbone of the mature masculine soul, the ability to create order without control, to guide without coercion, to love without losing strength. So hold your power as you would hold fire, with respect, not fear. Let it illuminate your path rather than scorch the ground beneath you. You were never meant to conquer the world. You were meant to bring it into harmony through your being. Be that man, not perfectly, reliably. Begin.